Someone asked me if I needed a PowerPoint, and I thought I'd just have a conversation with you this morning, because I think there's some very serious things that are going on in higher education. And really, all of us need to be aware of what they are, how they impact us at Albany State, and I like the sort of title we have, this catalyst for change, and what that means for all of us. Anytime I think about things that are very serious, I really reflect on the past and how we got here. In 1961, on August 4th, this day, Barack Obama was born in Honolulu. So this is the president's birthday today. And no one would have thought at the time that a young child born in one of the newer states would become president of the United States of America. So that birth was kind of a promise, and that's what happens when people come into the world. There's a lot of promise. And so this is President Barack Obama's birthday in 1961. He was born in Honolulu. In 1962, on August 5th, tomorrow, Nelson Mandela was arrested after being a fugitive for 17 months, and he was given life imprisonment on Robben Island. And we all know in 1990 he walked out of there without a bit of rancor, without any anger, and kept a nation together. And he symbolized the sort of eternal struggle of human beings around the world. There's just no question about that. Part of being human means to struggle and to prevail and to endure. And lastly, on August 6th, this coming Wednesday, 1965, Lyndon Johnson signed the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which really essentially changed the South. It changed the face of this region of the country. It also gave a person who was born in Honolulu in 1961 the ability to have most Americans to have the capacity to vote for him. Prior to those things happening, there was a status quo that people had normalized and accepted and had come to grow accustomed to the way of doing things. And part of what I want us to think about as we go through this sort of work for the next couple of days is to think about what will people say about us 100 years from now. When they look at Albany State, when they look back at Albany State 100 years from now, will they say in 2012 they dropped 400 students and they never recovered? That they never increased their numbers again because they couldn't adjust to change, they couldn't adjust to the demographics. Make no mistake about it, we will be written about just like people are writing about these others hundreds of years ago. So there will be an Albany State story that's going to be told about this generation of leaders, this generation of faculty members, this generation of students. So part of what I hope will come out of this conference, this new normal, a catalyst for change, and I like what Dr. Spearman said. This is not a hierarchical approach where there's an edict from the top and people fall in line. This is top-down, bottom-up converging, that everybody in every office should think about one thing that they can do better and each day improve that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about just some of the observations that I have been able to notice since I've been at Albany State and what I'm seeing around the country and also from my own life experiences in this business. But I want to mention 2 or 3 things before I get into some of those comments. We have some special guests. Dr. Brian T. Marks, who's an associate professor of psychology and director of the Morehouse Male Initiative, will be with us. And one of the things that I always like when I hear the name Morehouse is what Benjamin Mays did for a generation of young men. He placed a special burden on their back. And what he did was a set of high expectations. And one example, one man used who graduated from Morehouse, that each time they would go to graduate school, he would call them in one by one and say, you're going to Boston University, you're going to New York University. When you get up there, it's not just you. It's Morehouse, it's you and your family. That's the burden you got on your back to do well. So he had this exaggerated strong sense of a special burden to excel. That's a culture. That's a culture that's been supported and developed for generations at that institution. We have Dr. Christy Price, professor of psychology at Dalton State, who will be with us, and Dr. Michelle Cooper, the Institute for Higher Education Policy, she's the president of that organization. These are people who will bring a perspective, and one of the reasons I enjoy having these speakers with us, I think we learn by comparing and contrasting and listening to other people give a point of view about their work. And in turn, we learn from that. We now are in our 111th year at Albany State. And that's more than a century. I've talked about this a lot as we look back at what Dr. Holly and others had to deal with when they started this campus down in Albany, Georgia, on the Flint River, without air conditioning, without antibiotics, without pain medicine, without a lot of things we take for granted. How in the world could someone think about the education of young people with all the life issues facing them? And we now sit in 2014 in a space that's state of the art, and the air in here is conditioned and it's cool. And there are no church fans in here. And some of you grew up in places where you know what I'm talking about. You do that. So we are in a very different place in terms of what we have access to. But let me talk about kind of where we are in the next phase. We have an academic building on the horizon, fine arts building. It's been around for a long time. We have $19.8 million that's designated for 2016 fiscal year. I want to make sure, as we get that building up, that we also institutionalize something that's very new and not very widespread with us as an institution, and that's private giving. I spent a lot of years in the university system office in Atlanta, and one way you get buildings now is to have private giving as part of public support. And I would advise and encourage anybody who has any thoughts about giving for our alums and giving for our faculty and staff, that each year you ought to write a check to this institution. What does it take so that whomever is sitting in this role that I sit in, they have some leverage by saying we have done things for ourselves, not just asking for support for this building. That's going to be something we'll spend a lot of conversation on campus about, is how to encourage us as faculty and staff, as well as alums, to give to support. So this $19.8 million building will be state-of-the-art, inside, outside, and one of the best places in the nation. Dr. Edmond talked at our executive retreat about a few things that I want to highlight for HBCUs. One is being relevant, and that is a generational issue. That question would not have been raised in 1925, 1946, 1955. That question is being raised now, given the fact that we have an open system, that Americans can go anywhere they wish to go. At one time, we had a closed system, and especially in this part of the country, the system was very much closed about learning, so you couldn't go anywhere you wanted to go. And so relevance was not a question. It is now, when people are now in an open system. I want us to give a definition to that when people ask you that question, we have an enthusiastic, strong response to that. I have my own thoughts about it, but I think it's a collective response that we must give. And part of my own response is we need a more educated Georgia. That includes African Americans, that includes Hispanics, that includes all other racial and ethnic groups. That's what the issue is now. So how do we change systems to address that? The second thing that Dr. Edmond mentioned was demographics. We, in many parts of the state of Georgia, we have declining demographics. Our historic numbers, the places we've always gotten students, that population is going down. So what do? Do we sit and observe that, and each year have lower enrollment and keep getting budget cuts until we lay people off? Is that what we do? Do we watch that happen? I say no to that. I say we begin to understand this demographic shift and begin to make some changes to address that. The third thing is leadership. Leadership is not just someone who sits in a position with a title and a measure of authority. It's all of us, whether you are in financial aid, whether you are in food service, whether you're in operations on the grounds, that you must be in a position where you decide something must be done to improve this campus, to make it more relevant, more current, and one of the best places in the nation. It's not something that comes from an edict and a memo from somebody in a position of authority that sends it out. All of us must get engaged in that. So leadership is a broad definition as far as I'm concerned. And then governance. We talked a lot about governance, and one of the things I've noticed my years in the university system, that the normalization of discord and discontent, where sometimes if you're not very careful, you will define the position that you sit in as one of always opposition to something rather than something to get accomplished. I would encourage us that part of this new normal is to figure out how you act out your shared governance role, but do it in a way where it adds value to the institution. Because if you are day in and day out in an adversarial role, I don't care if it's in a relationship, whether it's in a family or an organization, it's going to be hard to get things done. There's just no question. And that's been borne out over the generations, no question about that. So I'd ask us to have some deep thoughts about that. And lastly, service and attitude. Dr. Edmond talked about that. If there's one area that I would love to see us make a difference and be dramatic about it, is how we treat our students and how we treat each other and how we bring about civility. And what we are doing is giving students some lifelong memories. When they leave this campus, it's going to impact them in two ways. They'll have memories about they were able to graduate because they had a schedule that showed them what they needed to take, what they must be able to do. That was clearly outlined, that they were respected and talked to as young adults when they encountered us at windows to pay bills or to do other things. Keep in mind, we've all been there. Just because you're 19 and 20 doesn't mean you're always right, but you always can have some respect and civility. So I'd encourage us to think about that, because you'd be surprised how many stories I get from our students who really are vocal and volunteer information about this. And when I say to some of us, my response is, don't get defensive about that. I'm just telling you what the definition is out there about and what students are saying. So I want us to think about service and attitude as huge. Enrollment declined at Albany State by 400 students in 2012. That's a lot of students. So we went down. That caused us to lose $2.3 million in money. Mr. Wakefield will tell you that's a slippery slope. If we lost $2.3 million for this coming fiscal year, and 80% of our money is tied up in people, salaries, that means we can't continue down that path. So all of us who look at enrollment and retention for me is the same as repeat customers. If we have these students here as faculty members, as administrators, they should not leave here without a degree. We should figure out ways to do study halls, to do support, and to have triggers to let us know when they get in trouble. Create a system of alert so that we know that we don't lose a student. Once they get admitted to Albany State, they ought to be good enough to get a degree. So we're not having our retention very high. That's huge for us in terms of our enrollment. So we drop 400 and continue to drop. That means at some point we'll have to reduce positions. We just can't keep reducing vacant positions and shifting people around. At some point, we're going to have to pay a price for that. And I need to be very direct and very candid. The other thing that we're having to do is to reduce operating costs and reduce travel budgets. Now, while these are unfortunate circumstances, We are in control of this. We are in control of this. We can get out and about in every high school, meeting high school teachers, principals, and counselors, and all over this state, telling the Albany State story. We have one of the most modern, state-of-the-art facilities in the nation. I've been on a lot of campuses, and I don't mean HBCUs, a lot of campuses. We have some nice facilities here. For me, that's part of our marketing and branding, is how we look and what we have access to. So we are in control of this. And what I meant by this next 100 years, where people look back at us and say they started to decline, they couldn't adjust. They wouldn't adjust to make a change. So I want us to know that this is not a woe discussion. This is a discussion where we are in charge of this process. One of the things that I want us to think about as we're looking at our strategic priorities is how much data we have about our students. And Dr. Edmond and others are working on ways to drill down in what we know about our students so that we can respond in a quicker and more prompt way to their demands and needs. So student-related data. How much do we know about our students in ways that will advantage our decision-making? And second, leveraging the process of activity and intellectual talent we have on this campus. How do we get our faculty members involved in ways they've not been involved before to help us retain our students? And lastly, university branding and marketing. One of the things that I want us to be so thoughtful about is to be able to tell the story of what a college education does, what it means to you, not just for you, but for your family. I've told this story many times. The first person in my family finished college in 1931 at Fisk University, and he was an uncle. And he normalized for the rest of the men in that family to go to college. So after that, everybody thought it wasn't painful, it wouldn't hurt you, and that you're going to get in and out and you'll learn something in the process. So this whole normalization, it's not just this first generation college student, it's this first generation college student and what they'll do for future generations. So I want us to think about how we leverage that. And then successful companies. One of the things that I've looked at over the years, and especially since I've been at Albany State, is what is it that successful companies do and successful organizations do? And one, they exceed expectations. When you hear people saying, I didn't know you were that good. I didn't realize you guys had that kind of program. So you're beginning to exceed expectations. And one of the things I want us to begin to think about, as we look at one area or two areas of internal services and external services that we can improve, how do we benchmark ourselves against the best in the country in that particular area, where we begin to exceed expectations and begin to surprise ourselves and surprise others about how well we are and how good we are at what we do. We are in Southwest Georgia. We're not in Manhattan, New York. We're not in Hobbs, New Mexico. And there are some unique challenges in Southwest Georgia. One of them is healthcare, another is education, another is economic development. We have on our campus, now I've met a lot of people since I've been here, but we have some of the best faculty members, the best problem solvers and best researchers I've seen anywhere. And we also have some good strategic thinkers. All of that's in place. What I am so interested in doing is to begin to strategically deploy these things to solve problems in Southwest Georgia, not just teach our students on campus, but look at this section of the state that has some unique challenges and difficulties, that we begin to address those in ways where people see us as beginning to add value in ways that they had not anticipated before. One of the things I want to do, kind of in closing, I want to mention one student, Kelsey Wright. Kelsey was a finalist for the HBCU Award, Male Student of the Year. and he was chosen. I don't know if he's here this morning, but he's now part of the White House Initiative on Historically Black Colleges. But one of the things that, as I've observed this young man, is what happened to him at Albany State that has given him such strength, such confidence, and such the ability to navigate in some very broad environments. And how do we begin to help more of our students leave with that sort of experience and confidence? And if you have not met him, but this is one student that I really, and he's not the only one, but there are a number of students here that we've done this sort of work with, and I want us to begin to broaden that. And let me close by doing a couple of things. I want to talk a little bit about what I consider some of the risk factors. Then I'll talk about some of the opportunities, and then some of the promising features. And some of these I've already mentioned, but Southwest Georgia demographic projections. If we look at our historic population, that may not be the sole source that we look at now for the future. And I want us to begin to think about what that means and how we address that change. Enrollment rates of qualified students. Our enrollment must go up. Everything on this campus hinges on our student numbers. So if you are in an office and you have some impact on enrollment, and I can't imagine any position here that would not have that, I want you to think about your role and responsibility in recruitment, retention, and graduation. Those are the three things you need to be thinking about. How do we recruit students? How do we retain them? And how do we graduate them? The other issue for me is retention from the freshman to the sophomore year. All of us know this is a risky time for students. You come here with all this apparent freedom, and students sometimes do things that are harmful to themselves. We know that. That's throughout generations, students have done that. How do we make sure that we're providing the best support we can from that freshman to sophomore year retention to make sure that they are successful and stay through that year and continue? We had a very small first-time freshman class in 2012. That's going to impact enrollment for the next 5 years. So it wasn't just 2012 that we had this low enrollment. For the next 5 years, that small class will impact this campus. Affordability for students. One of the issues for me is if we have students leaving here with undergraduate degrees owing $25,000 to $28,000 and not understanding the impact of this when they get the refund checks and have a good time with that, and they don't understand the long-term consequences, that's scary for me. It's this sort of debt that they're having placed on themselves, because that's going to come home to roost. And in many ways, I was very fortunate. I was a veteran on the GI Bill and had a pretty vibrant GI Bill, but it paid my tuition. So I got a bachelor's and a master's on the GI Bill, and then finished my doctorate owing a grand sum of $1,400 for all 3 degrees. And that allowed me to get started in life with not a lot of debt on my back, with 3 degrees, not just 1. So I'm worried about that. I'm concerned about our students and this affordability. The other thing that some of you heard Mr. Wakefield talk about is performance-based funding. We're going to move away from just head count. That is how many students you have. But what you do with these students, how well you retain them, how well you graduate them, and there's some other factors that will be placed in that formula as well. But it's going to place us under a process of how well we perform that will impact our budget. That's coming down the line. I have had many conversations with Ms. Leggett about our Title III funding. Each time when I lead that conversation, I think about how many offices we have that are Title III dependent. That we have some offices on this campus that are almost entirely supported by Title III, and that's federal support. I am concerned about that, because any time you get too many eggs in one basket, that's a difficult thing for any organization to kind of live with. So I'm beginning to think of other ways we can get outside funding, other resources. So Title III dependency is a huge issue. Another area is SACS, Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, and the outcome of our 5-year review. You can't be in this business unless you have a stamp of approval about quality, about processes, about excellence. So we're not just at Albany State without oversight. There's oversight for our business. People come in and take a hard look at us and decide where we are and how we measure against the whole background of higher education. So I'm concerned about how well we do with that. Leadership at Albany State. One of the things that I hope we can do, and I'm spending a lot of time thinking about this and having some conversations, is stabilizing our leadership. That's at all levels, dean's level, department head level, and getting faculty members who find a home here and find a place where they can do their teaching, research, and scholarship, and share that with the nation and share that with this region. So leadership is not by position alone, but by what we do and how people engage in this campus. One of the things that I've said to a lot of people on campus about this whole idea is transparency and trust and having divisions. There is nothing that I can think about in my office that I don't feel like I can share with you and tell you why we're doing it, what we're doing, how we're doing it. So this whole idea of an open and transparent process, there are a whole lot of issues that we're thinking about. They're very complicated. They're not as simple as they appear to be at a distance. Because when I sat in positions as a student at the University of Alabama, we had strong opinions about how to tell the university president how to run the place. We thought he didn't know what he was doing. And we went to see him and told him that. And sat in his office, and a couple of guys banged on the table and tried to explain to this man how he was not running that campus in a way that was conducive to the well-being of these 5 people who felt so strong about it. So I say that in ways that I understand that. Where you sit sometimes determines what you see and how you feel about things. But this is much more complicated than it appears to be. But if you have questions about anything, please ask. The other thing, and I've spoken about this whole idea of a common vision, customer service, and being on the same page. Great organizations, good organizations, somehow manage a consensus about the future. And when I say our 3 things that I want us to put a stake in the ground on, that's enrollment, retention, and graduation. And around those 3 things, a whole lot of activity will occur. When you retain students, it's customer service. It's helping them get graduated. And when they do graduate, do we have companies coming here and helping them get jobs? And I guess the next one, which is kind of dear to my heart, is data for decision making. This is not unique to Albany State. A lot of organizations I've seen, people make decisions based upon narrative, what somebody told me, what I heard. Did you know? And what I am trying to make sure that when we make decisions about the future of this campus, it's driven by some hard numbers, that we have an accurate picture of what is going on. The next one is underutilization of technology. I would like, for this coming year, for every office that we have, is to examine how technology can streamline your processes. There are campuses where you can, and we may be doing that here, I don't know, but there's so many things you can do online, whether it's getting transcripts, whether it's registration. But look at technology and see if technology is infused deeply into the business processes of our campus at the highest level. Not the Albany State way, not the university system way, but the best in the country. That comes from you. That comes from you looking at your unit and your organization and say, are we using technology in ways that really does streamline our business processes and make life more livable for all of us? Unpredictable nature of higher education. There's a whole lot of things that are going on right now that give special pressures to higher education. When I came into the system many years ago, the state of Georgia paid 75% of what it costs to educate a young student at Albany State. It now pays about 50. That means the student has to come up with 50 through either family or Pell Grants or other sources. So we've reduced that, and we won't go back. That won't be a returning sort of state of affairs. So this whole idea of the unpredictable nature and special pressures on higher education is really huge. Now, those are some of the risks. Those are things that I want you to, with me, as you in your offices, to think about. But now, what are some of the promising features? Is improving enrollment and retention rates. Positive financial audits. One of the things that I cannot tell you how pleased I am is that we have audits that are positive. When people come from the outside and examine our books and examine how we spend money, examine how we make decisions around finances, when we get positive audits, that is something that I think for me is near the top of the list of something I expect that I should want and this position should want, is a positive audit. And you should want that as well, because that says we are doing our business in the sunshine, we're doing it in an effective way, so these audits tell us stories. The other promising feature is improving customer service. I'm beginning to see in some areas where we're thinking about training, we're doing some things in ways that we've never done before, so I see some real light at the end of the tunnel on some of that. I think the sensitivity is high for how important that is, and that's good. Another promising feature I mentioned earlier is this attractive physical plan. I think we may have gotten used to this, but we have some nice facilities on this campus. I was reminded the other day, and I think I'll stop using with our students. I was telling them I came here in 1994 when this place was flooded, and what the campus looked like then versus what it looks like now, and I thought, they were not born then. And so I could be talking about the Napoleonic War as far as they're concerned. They would look at me like, Dr. Dunning, well, that was before I was born. I'm sitting here thinking, everybody knows this, but they had this kind of glassy look like 94. That's a long time ago. And so I've quit talking about that to our students. But the point I've been trying to make is that this campus was underwater where my office is right now. It was a lake down there. And when I came back for some of the ribbon cuttings and some of the buildings up in this area, there were alums from the 50s and the 60s who couldn't stop crying because they looked at this Albany State campus and could not have imagined that it ever looked like this. So we have an attractive physical plan. I want us to brand that and talk about that. And we're going to have if there's one thing I'm going to do in this job, is get some new signage for our campus. I've been talking about this. In fact, I've worn myself out talking about it. I know I've worn others out talking about it. But I want us to present ourselves in a way that is smart, it's elegant, it's nice, and it looks good to the world. And I want us to be able to walk around day in and day out and see that as well. So this attractive physical plan. The other thing is faculty leadership. I've had some very good meetings with members of our faculty and members of the faculty senate, and I've talked about some of these basic parameters around this whole idea. I'm comfortable with dissent. That's part of what this nation is about. What I do want is dissent to turn into constructive plans for the future. How do you do that? And so this whole idea of having faculty leadership who wants to partner with the administrative leadership, that's a good thing. And I don't think we can solve some of these problems unless we have that. And lastly, as a promising feature, is this opening and collaboration with places like Darton, Albany Tech, and the school system. We are quickly going to start moving from meetings to action steps. And one of the things we wanted to do with meetings in this community is to give community leaders and citizens a voice about the future of Albany, and be patient about that process and be patient about the listening, because I view this work as intergenerational work. There's no quick fix on this. We are a community, as I drive from here to Columbus and Columbus to Atlanta, is we have one of the most pronounced agrarian parts of this world, as you look out there. So we feed out of Southwest Georgia a lot of the nation, a lot of parts of the world. And so this whole idea of how do we collaborate, not just with training nurses, teachers, business people, but people in the agribusiness community is very sophisticated. And one thing I think I want us to communicate to our students, this sophistication of science, engineering, technology, and mathematics now in this kind of agribusiness community is fascinating to me. So this whole drone project where we're looking at how we use drones in agriculture to make a difference for the output of farming communities. Now, lastly, let me close by talking about some of the opportunities. I don't see a way to address what we'll do in enrollment unless we diversify and expand our student recruitment. I don't see how we can make this work. There's no other way. The demographics won't support us not doing this. So diversifying and expanding student recruitment with special emphasis on Southwest Georgia as a targeted area and some special parts of Atlanta as well. We know where these students come from. We've got to increase our retention and graduation rates beyond current and predicted levels. We know what that is. So let's look at what they are current and what they're predicted to be, and let's increase beyond that. Marketing and branding. Telling our story is perhaps one of the things that I think people in higher education have not done well throughout the generations. Our values support learning, support college scholarship and teaching, but some people consider that bragging, but it's not bragging. It's telling your story of how you market yourself, how you brand yourself, and what people know about your academic programs, what they know about what you are doing as an institution. We better get engaged in this as deeply as we can and as soon as we can. Another opportunity is reallocating resources for distinctive undergraduate programs that have high demands. Now that speaks to making some changes internally, but we have some programs here that are high demand programs and students are getting jobs right out of college that are high paying jobs. Are we able to strengthen those programs in ways with the existing resources that we have? Developing innovative programs with our sister institutions. Dr. Edmond and her counterpart at Darden, they've been meeting to look at articulation agreements and programs where the 2 years people spend at Darden, students can come over here in a very seamless way. And I want us to make sure that the students are aware of this, they know how to do it, and they navigate very quickly and very easily. So this whole idea of creating that opportunity in a very transparent way is very helpful. The last thing I want to mention, and this is connected to this whole idea of how we work with our students on campus, is alumni giving. We have been historically very low in our alumni giving, and I've met with 9 or 10 chapters around the state of Georgia, and I've said this to our alums. And one thing that I find that's so helpful and so easy to do is just tell the truth. If we haven't given money, I just say that. And if we're near the bottom, I say that too. And let you process it however you think you wish to process it. But telling our alums that historically we've not given very much. And oftentimes many people will find reasons that, well, I didn't have this at Albany State, I was not treated this way, and this happened for me. So people begin to find this sort of rich repository of excuses about why they do not do that. What I am saying to you that as part of our next future, the next phase of life at Albany State University will be this notion of state support, student support, and private giving. There's no way that this campus can work without that. So let me do a couple of summary statements. I think the state of this The university is strong. I think it's good, and I think it can get better. And I am deeply, deeply committed for two reasons. I can't think of anything more important in the life of citizens in a free and open society than education. People who looked at this for generations have talked about the role of learning in a complicated society. There's nothing more important than that. All of us in this room, in one way or the other, can look back and identify family processes and family structures and say, my college education changed things for me. It changed them for my family. It changed it for my children. So I can't think of one single thing that's more important to me than this learning process for these young students walking around this campus that I see daily. And I would hope that as part of what we do, we enjoy life here, we have a good time here, but we know the nature of this stuff is very serious. And this nation is at a place where it needs a more educated nation, a more educated Georgia. And we are kind of at ground zero. We're it. We are the leaders in an institution of higher education that can do something about this. I would encourage you, if you have thoughts, share those with me. I think share those with Dr. Edmonds, share those with the department head, or even in faculty meetings. But talk about the nature of this place and how to nurture it in ways that makes it one of the best. And one of the things I have not done, I think part of it is, many of you have heard me tell this story, but I had not been more than a couple of hundred miles away from home at age 18. Then I went 8,000 miles away from home off the coast of China, and almost traumatized by that experience of a 2-year experience of what I learned and how much I saw and what I learned about other people from around the nation. So this whole idea of just being in Southwest Georgia and that's all we think about, that's all we worry about, no, we are part of a world community. We're part of a community that's trying to strengthen ourselves and trying to get better and trying to look at our education and our health. We preside over this. That's the interesting piece about this. We preside over this as faculty members, as leaders. So I want us to be an us discussion, an us conversation. And there are things that you may have an interest in or concerns about. We do not need to have those, except in a very much overt way, talk about them. Bring those up so we can see how we can get to the bottom of those and make us better. Thank you for listening. I appreciate this very much and look forward to being with you the rest of these 2-3 days.